And we're live.
Here we go.
KHNC. It's so great to see you. You are listening
60
to the Compliance Report. And I just want to remind you guys, everything the state says is the truth, and everything it has, it absolutely deserves.
Dude,
back to you.
You know what? I am totally of the opinion that there is nothing evil about forcing people to give up parts of their income, forcing people to, abide by laws that they do not consent to and that others do not consent to around them. And generally, I think it's a good thing, and for the greater good is probably the single greatest motivator for good deeds that has ever existed.
Nothing gets things done like force and violence.
You know what? I stand firm on the team that sides with the boot.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Why don't we build pyramids anymore, really?
Well, I mean, at this point, I think I deserve my face on not just one statue, not just 10 statues.
Carved into the face of the moon.
Carve it into every statue that currently exists. That should be my face. I want the Kim Jong-un experience here, guys.
No, truly. You guys are listening to the Liberty Revolt, a truly F the government, let's go Brandon entity here on 1360 KHNC. And I'm so glad to announce, by the way, that we will be taking over your radio waves every morning from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m.
Monday through Friday.
It's
going to be amazing. You're going to get more of the Liberty Revolt. We are going to have to change the name of the show, and I truly think Compliance
I don't think we have to.
We don't?
I don't think we should. The Liberty Revolt has been our branding this whole time. Why should we change it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, but if we do, I think ironically calling it the Compliance Report would be pretty catchy too.
I think we should just have little skits here and there called the Compliance Report, where we do the exact opposite of what we usually do.
Yeah, talk about how if I was truly a racist and I made my way into politics, and I truly did believe that certain people of certain colors were lesser than me, but I wanted to do good. I would make sure schooling reflects that I think these people are lesser than me and remove any standard that might tell this person.
Folks, I genuinely believe we should put down our arms in solidarity with the government.
Yeah. You know what? I think our friends over in Australia have sent a wonderful example. I mean, I promise you, it wasn't
the fact that Did you hear about the manhunt?
Well, did you hear about just the freaking concentration camps?
Did you hear about the manhunt? There's a manhunt, because two COVID negative teens escaped from their quarantine camp.
Yep. Oh my gosh.
So Australia is unleashing the manhunt.
I thought these things were consensual.
I'm just going to go out there and say the debate over whether or not the Second Amendment is necessary is over.
Yeah. I would have said it was over a while ago, but it's super duper over at this point. And if you don't think it is, and you somehow reason your way,
perhaps Australia should implement a gun buyback back program.
Dude, well, it's funny because you'll hear people talk about it's not going to get that bad. What was it, a year ago? We were like, they're going to start putting people in concentration camps. It's like, no. Hey, stop comparing us to Nazis, right? When people say, I'm just following orders, it's like, well, they start off at the Nuremberg defense. But, that shows a level of, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, I'm fine with whatever we're going to do to these people in the end.
Well, this is one reason why you guys should tune into Freak Red Radio, Sundays at 4. He did a great episode where he talked about the Sanford prison experiments.
Yes.
Where they actually put these students in this role-playing position where some students were assigned to be prisoners and some students were assigned to be prison guards, and watched how it psychologically affected them and how they started manifesting the character traits of the roles that they were filling. And it took zero time at all for these people role-playing as prison guards to start manifesting actual characteristics of sadism and freaky things.
Well, what people don't understand, and this is why with Jordan Peterson, he talks about how we must discover our inner monster so we can learn to fight it. You have to acknowledge. He would ask his students, and it's something that I ask people that I run into on campus. He goes, do you think you would have been a Nazi if you lived in Germany in the 1920s and 30s?
Or a slaveholder if you would have been a man or a woman in basically any part of human history.
Yeah, no, and you'll have most of the students in there will say, no, I wouldn't be. And he's like, he just looks at him and goes, if you think that the 95% of the Nazi army and Nazi party was not made up of people that were not Joseph Goebbels or Adolf Hitler, then you're mistaken. The prison guards in Nazi Germany were people just like you. And the sooner you can acknowledge that that is within all of us, and that's why you have to acknowledge that and be willing to put up a fight against it when it starts to prevent itself. The people that are the most okay with force right now are the people on the left who are advocating for vaccine mandates. You have Antifa on the street attacking people because they're protesting against government mandates.
Oh yeah, and by the way, guys, for those who don't know, and I just real quick want to say, what's up, Brent? Great to see you, man. It's always nice to have you on our live streams. Christopher T. Bennett wants to comment on we were talking about Australia. Guys, if you want to find the live stream, you can go to facebook.com/Liberty Revolt Media or youtube.com/Liberty Revolt and jump in the conversation with us. But Christopher says, it's 5 escapes now. I hope people start live streaming their escape. It will be the new viral trend. We should start a GoFundMe to donate to successful escapes as a prize. Christopher, I think that's a great idea.
Until they put in the watchtowers and raise a viral alert. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Liberty Revolt on 1360 KHNC.
Anita, what's up, girl? So good to see you. Guys, if you're hanging out on the live stream with us, by the way, Anita's a Medicare expert. So
yeah. In Walkaway, Colorado, right?
And Walkaway, yeah. Kobe Peters, what's up, man?
Kobe, it's good to see you, bud.
Can you guys tell that I've been talking far too much? But real quick, I wanted to mention, because you were talking about Jordan Peterson. There's a book he talks about, Ordinary Men, which essentially documents how regular police officers and what could have been, you could have made the case that they were doing something honorable by sticking with their pals on the force during tough times, how over the course of the war, they just took one step further and further into social pathology of the masses. And this is what I was referring to when I talked about Freak Red, is he juxtaposed the Sanford prison experiment with what's going on in Australia.
Yeah.
And said that, look how the police force they were ordinary Australians are adopting the roles that society is kind of placing upon them.
Yeah.
It's freaky stuff.
Which is why people need to be cognizant of, and I want to talk about it once we get back on the radio, because I'm going to bring up the Tucson guy, and I just want to explain what my belief on the police are, because I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I do not think you can get rid of the police, but there are better ways to handle it, be it privatized or whatever. But
we're coming back on the air. Live stream, folks, we're coming back on the air. It really is interesting how people can adjust to the roles that are being imposed on them by society. That if your culture, your society, or even just your friend group or your family starts putting you in a position of some type of responsibility, or puts you in a position where even in your own mind there's kind of a caricature of it, you start adopting some of those personality traits, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for like victimhood. You start convincing someone they're a victimhood, treating someone like they're a victim. They start believing they're a victim, and all of a sudden they start manifesting the symptoms of a victim. It is really interesting. I mean, I think, were we talking about Ordinary Men during the break or on the radio?
Yeah, you mentioned it during the break. Yeah.
Okay. Jordan Peterson talks about this book, Ordinary Men, where it documents how German police officers in the 1930s who were just regular guys who didn't grow up in like the Hitler Youth or anything like that, who weren't indoctrinated into Nazism throughout their young formative years, full-grown adult police officers in the 1930s at the beginning of the war, for presumably, it could be made the case that they were doing it for honorable reasons, wanted to, stick with the force, and how their higher ups had told them, if you don't want to go along with this, you don't have to go along with this. You can leave at any time. There's no consequences. And they wanted to rally, back the blue, if you will. They wanted to rally with each other and be there for their brothers in arms, if you will. And how over the course they as a group started taking more and more inhumane steps. First, it was rounding up the Jewish men of ages 19 to 20, 25, whatever. Maybe you want to get the athletic men who are supposedly your enemy, deal with them somehow. And then it was like put them on carts, and then it was put them in camps, and then it was put them in stadiums. And then before too long, they were taking pregnant women out into fields and shooting them in the head.
Yeah. It's not just all of a sudden you go from point A to point B. In this case, it's like you get there one step at a time. It depends on, if you're motivated to help your community and help those around you, then when you take on that role, if it is that role, as it evolves beyond that role, you don't really notice it because it's one step at a time. And next thing you know, you're atop of Mount Fascist, pointing your gun down at the people below you.
Right. And Zach on Freak Red Radio juxtaposed the Sanford prison experiments and even some of the stuff that Peterson talks about with what's going on in Australia and how these ordinary Australian police officers are adopting the roles of these like fascist, goose-stepping, COVID enforcers.
Yes, they are. And it's what people have to understand. And this is where my personal apprehension with the police comes from. And when I say it's always bad to just blindly follow one force, it's not that I don't like police. On an individual level, I love police officers. If you are willing to make that decision to protect your community, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Police will exist no matter what, because the service of protecting people is always going to be in demand, right? But what we have to be cognizant of is what kind of power we are giving the police, because their mission, their goal is to, when they say protect and serve, a lot of people lose sight of who they're actually protecting along the way. They think protecting, because when you think the government is the people, if you have not read Anatomy of the State and you conflate government and the people, then when you are protecting the people by enforcing the state, those two things are not separate. So to protect and serve, no, you are there to protect the people, not just from criminals, but from a government that is violating their rights.
And a lot of police get this, and they really don't get the coverage they deserve. Kobe brings up a good point, protecting their pension. It really comes down to incentives and accountability, right? Yeah. What are the incentives introduced by a certain policy structure, and who's held accountable when those incentives are corrupted?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what it comes down to. So when people ask me, how I feel about the police, I go, on it, like I said, on an individual level, I love police officers. Like I met Justin Smith, the Larimer County Sheriff. Wonderful guy, and he gets it.
Jeff Fisher's a great guy too.
Yeah, no, these guys understand their duty, and in those kinds of situations, I don't see any difference between a privatized and a public police, because what's the important part that privatizing would bring is accountability, right?
Competition.
Yeah, and what we all care about is accountability. Like when it comes to what are our biggest issues with the police, it's a lot of times it's not just the police, it's the government as a whole. There is no accountability. And so on an individual level, police officers also need to understand what to protect and serve their community means. Their community is the people, not the government.
And we all need to be consciously aware of what are the roles that we are adopting that we're unaware of and unconscious of.
Yeah.
That's maybe society is putting on us. Brent says red, white, and blue stands for freedom until they're flashing behind you. That's good,
no, that is perfect. But
But I originally, I think I reached out to you earlier this week. And this goes part, into my LPR class where we've been talking about defending the Declaration of Independence. And one of the remarkable things about the American founding in regards to slavery, which is probably the biggest thing that is leveraged against the United States, is our great moral stain. And fair enough, it is a moral stain, absolutely. Yes. It's a violation of self-ownership and private property, frankly.
Oh my gosh.
And the non-aggression principle, I would say, falls in there as well. Hey, Janine, so great to see you, girl. How you doing? But what's really remarkable about the American founders is how they were able to step outside of their own culture, right? It's really easy for us as people living in 2021 to say slavery is reprehensible, and why could they have ended it sooner, and why couldn't they have given?
Why did they put it there in the first place?
And why was it there in the first place? And all these things. I mean, we have to understand that slavery is something that has existed for all of human history. It's existed for prehistory. So prehistory is prehistory is what we consider history beyond what we have written documentation for.
It's basically anything that comes before Greece is considered prehistory. That's usually when they're given the idea. It's usually I was just adding that in for you.
Absolutely.
But what I was gonna say, the irony is that if you're going to talk about slavery, it's inherent in basically every culture up until about the 1700s. Is with the Enlightenment is really when the idea of slavery went down.
Adam Smith wrote in 1776 that Britain was the only place where conversations about abolishing slavery
took place.
Yeah.
What's really funny is Britain, as it exists now, the British people having ancestry that is both Celtic and Scandinavian, that is a huge part of it. A lot of what happened is the Vikings would come over. First and foremost, they would either take women back with them from the British Isles, or it got to the point where they just stayed, made a lot of British people their freaking slaves because they took them over, raped their women, impregnated their women, all this other stuff.
Typically how governments are born.
But that was happening in the 900s. The British people themselves are the descendant of slaves. The white people you're talking about when you're hitting all this, they were the descendants of slaves, Sicilians.
Yeah. Interesting little point you brought up there.
Yeah.
Do you know where the word slave comes from?
Slav.
It's a derivative of Slav, as in Slavic, the Europeans who were notorious slaves of both other Europeans, Catholics in the Roman Empire,
the Hungarians,
and the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
So when people use the word slavery, the origins of the word slavery are actually referring to victimized white people.
Yes, no, that word is literally, that goes to why the racial narrative is so dumb and broken, because just looking into the word you're disparaging shows you, hey, it wasn't just black people this is happening.
Right, there's a much broader context. I mean, most people today think of slavery as an institution perpetrated by white colonialism, or that it was something as simple as whites enslaving blacks. And that, and we have these political and cultural operatives today that harness this narrative for their own personal gain. Whether it's they want to be the star of the social justice movement, and they're looking for a grievance to peddle on, or they're a politician that wants to garnish power and spur this redistributive societal justice through the force of government kind of ideology. But tragedy and hypocrisy is not the moral of the story when it comes to the founding of this country and as it relates to slavery, right? The story of slavery in the American founding is actually the story of a revolutionary moral awakening and the courage to triumph.
And what else happened? Because I know you wanted to talk about this. What else helped absolutely destroy the idea of slavery? Capitalism. They found out, economically speaking, if you want a nation that produces more goods, giving people the freedom to do that as they see they fit, and work towards something rather than just forcing them into doing one thing and beating them into submission if they don't. Oh, wait, that leads to more innovation. It leads to more accumulation of wealth. More people can have more wealth and generate more wealth.
It turns out that when you force people to do stuff, you're forcing them to do things that they're, number one, not interested in doing and probably not very efficient at. When you give people the freedom to pursue what they want to pursue, they're going to pursue the things that they're most efficient at.
Exactly. And what's even more ironic about all of this is the same people that talk incessantly about this, about slavery and specifically its racial context with Black people today. Also, I guarantee you, almost 9 out of 10 that you talk to are also going to hate capitalism and talk about how capitalism leads to slavery.
Right. Which capitalism is the only socioeconomic system founded on private property rights, self-ownership, and individual freedoms.
Exactly. But it goes to how broken this was. And I love how we started talking about the police.
Slavery
and we got to here.
Slavery is a state-run institution.
Yeah, it is. It requires the state in order for it to work, which is also ironic because the same people that are talking about the impacts of slavery are the same ones talking about how capitalism is bad and we need to socialize medicine and free healthcare or free education and free college education. And that needs to be, we need to get, these privatized so many different sectors. And I'm looking at them and going, so you're telling me this government that committed the sin of slavery, the sin of Jim Crow, was complicit in the Tulsa race riots, was complicit in the Tulsa race riots and the Tuskegee experiments and the crack epidemic and the systemic stripping of Black communities of their gun rights.
They must be the solution to tyranny.
Yeah. I promise you, they're going to do right in this instance.
They're friendly little guys. We're really going to take care of you.
What's really terrifying is they're not lying because in their mind, they're the ones taking over that power. So they know that it's going to work out because they're just going to flip it. Rather than seeing that
they have a great way of rationalize that whatever they want to do is good for everybody.
Yeah, but it's also terrifying because it goes back to Michel Foucault. These people that espouse these ideas, they are fully cognizant of hierarchies. They just, throw in the racial aspect. They know, though, being at the top is where you want to be because being at the top is who gets to oppress the rest, right? And so I think that they are cognizant of what the government has done, at least subconsciously, and at least subconsciously in their mind, the reason why it wouldn't happen under their system is because they would be the ones in charge. So they know that they would be, could choose who to oppress.
I had a job for a company actually going to left-wing Antifa rallies, infiltrating and filming these people. And I've heard their inside conversations, and I'm telling you, these people would be the first ones in line to enslave somebody if they had the opportunity.
They don't.
Let me assure you.
They don't want equality. They want revenge. They want vengeance.
But I really do. We're almost halfway through the show here, and I really would like to talk about slavery in the American founding and why it is actually a story of victory, not a story that we should feel guilty about. Yeah. Although it was a horrible thing. Slavery is a terribly immoral thing. And regretfully, it's a tragedy that it happened. But before we can talk about slavery in America, we need to further establish the context. I want to talk about slavery and human history a little bit and give actual examples. But before we get to our next break, guys, I just want to remind you, we will be doing the 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. morning show. And it's going to be local news and activism. So I sure do hope that you guys are feeding us information to help us cover 2 hours of daily content first thing in the morning. We really are going to be relying on you guys to help give us the information that's going to help us keep our audience informed. So if you're an activist, if you have an organization out there, if you're just in the know, send us an email, libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com. You're listening to the Liberty Revolt on 1360 KHNC.
When we do the show, that's going to be the one thing that I ask, and you obviously nailed it. I like clean intro outros from the commercial break.
I do too.
No,
I think we should start coordinating a system. Like, I don't want to be like choreographing, but I kind of do want to be choreographing a little. We should have more than just you're listening to 1360 together. We should have like a variety of lines that we can do together.
No, that's fine. We'll come up with them as we go.
Oh, we certainly will come up with them, and our audience is going to help us come up with them.
Sowing the seeds of doubt.
Kobe Peters says capitalism led to technology that outworked slaves. It's true. The decorticator made it so that you could process hemp fibers without the use of slave labor.
The cotton gin led to basically eliminating the productiveness of slaves over. If you could get yourself a cotton gin, you didn't need slaves anymore.
Right.
It helped.
But I mean, capitalism also produced
it kind of
products
made it worse
that made slavery in demand. For example, this is something I learned about. One of the many ways that Britain was propping up American slavery post-American Revolution was when the machine came out that they could weave clothing, came out in Britain. In like the 1800s. It put a huge demand for cotton into the market that nobody could keep up with except America, of the American South.
Yeah.
Right? The American South was the only place where they could mass produce cotton quickly enough. And so that industry really propped up.
It made it, what it did was it made it worse at first, right? It made it so you needed to produce so much cotton. If your only answer was slavery, you were like, oh, we need more slaves. But what they realized very quickly, sorry, didn't mean to hit that. I would go like that. But what they realized very quickly was, so this machine this guy just built can do all of that. Oh, cool. We can stop it.
Yeah. They then came out with a machine shortly after that made it so, because originally in order to pick cotton, you would have to get it and you would have to crush it and then you would have to manually pick out all the seeds.
Yep.
There we go. Yeah. Two white guys who've never picked cotton in our lives sitting here talking about the process. In the wild. Yeah, I don't, Got a big smile from Evan on that one. He likes that.
Kobe, you can't hear, but...
And by the way, Cindy, I made that Chinese intro music just for you, girl.
Kobe, you can't hear it because this is only on the radio, but our intro music for that is Naruto.
Kobe says, come on down, I'll take you picking.
Kobe is black, ladies and gentlemen. We've had him on the show before. I want to get him back live in the studio for our morning show
allegedly
someday.
Black.
I mean, it's actually pretty funny because you're going to be talking a little bit about the history of how slavery goes everywhere, even in America. His family, I've told it before, his family the black side of his family was brought to Oklahoma as slaves on the Trail of Tears, and I'm going to get it wrong, but I think it was with the Choctaw, but I forget which tribe it was. But yes, even it creates a contradiction. It creates a very big contradiction here.
I have some tribes I'm going to call out, okay? We're going to cancel some Native American tribes today.
The Aztecs, the Mayans?
We're going to cancel a few of them. I mean, because it's true. Tragically, slavery has been a universal to human civilizations and has taken many forms as far back as we look into history. And it says something incredibly troubling about human nature, namely that if you can't trust someone with freedom, how can we trust someone with power over others?
Yeah.
Right? That no one should have unmitigated authority over another individual. No. Regardless of circumstance.
You always got to consider when you're giving the state authority over someone you dislike, in this, for instance, if the vaccinated are trying to exert authority over the unvaccinated, you have to consider what would happen if the people I don't like got this power and tried to use it on me. Would they be able to? Would it be able to hurt me? Which is why, the government it's one of the few things that I actually laugh about. I laugh with Mitch McConnell about rather than at Mitch McConnell about. But when Harry Reid in 2012 got rid of the Senate filibuster, or not the Senate filibuster, when he got rid of the supermajority needed for Supreme Court justices to get Elena Kagan in there, and Elena Kagan, I think, was the one that they did that for. Oh, wow. All of a sudden you're pissed off when it's used for Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. It's like, he told you it was going to happen. You did this to yourself.
Right. I don't want to get too far off topic. Yeah. Guys, Kevin can go on tangents about anything. That's why I have him on the show.
It comes down to power.
But no, as far back as the first documented human civilization, Sumer in Mesopotamia, in 3500 BC, we have documented references to slavery as an institution. Archaeological evidence, such as primitive tools and artifacts, suggest human ancestors were practicing slavery before written language.
Yeah.
Mass enslavement goes back as far as the development of agriculture and animal domestication during the Neolithic Revolution 11,000 years ago. Some form of mass slavery has existed almost everywhere people have been stationary in agrarian societies with the development of social stratification. And we can assume individual forms of slavery, sex slavery, and things like that, child labor, has existed all around the world.
That's why you had kids, so someone could work the freaking field. Like, that's why you had children long ago. The more children you had, the more people you had working the fields.
So you mentioned slavery in pre-colonial North America.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Included the Comanche of the Great Plains tribes, the Creek of Georgia, the fishing societies such as the Yurok, who lived in Northern California, the Pawnee, and the Klamath. When St. Augustine, Florida, was founded in 1565, the site already had enslaved Native Americans whose ancestors had migrated from Cuba. The Hadai and Tligniget, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point.
Who lived along Alaska's southeast coast were traditionally known as fierce warriors and slave traders, raiding as far as California's. In their society, slavery was hereditary. After slaves were taken as prisoners of war, children of slaves were fated to be slaves themselves. Among a few Pacific Northwest tribes, as many as 1/4 of the population were slaves. They were typically captured by raids on enemy tribes or purchased on intertribal slave markets. Slaves would sometimes be killed in potlatches to signify the owner's contempt for property. All of the great indigenous civilizations of Latin America, including the Mayans and the Aztec, engaged in mass slavery, and much worse than that.
Oh my God, the Mayans had there's a diary entry from I don't think it was Cortez, but I think it might have been Cortez, but it was of a Spanish conquistador when he first got to the Aztec Empire, and they were in the middle of one of their great rituals, and he said it was a mountain of 40,000 human skulls is what he stumbled upon, and these were like virgins and stuff too. They specifically either used other tribes, went and grabbed virgins from other tribes, or from all over, and they stacked for their rituals. They killed them and stacked their skulls. The only reason you want to know one thing though? I am not surprised by any of that. You know why? I do not think that the Native Americans were a lesser people than the people that came from Europe. Came to this continent from Europe. They just didn't have the same high level of technology. And you know what? Whoever has the best technology wins the wars. Okay, cool. But anyways, what it comes down to is the only way I would ever be surprised at what you just read, Bucky, is if I thought the Native Americans were an undeveloped people, were not the same kind of people that came from Europe, were not prone to war, prone to confederation, prone to trade, prone to slavery, prone to literally all the things that human beings everywhere else in the world are prone to, which I just wanted to point out because it points to the irony of the leftist view of all of this.
Right. You know what's really interesting is that when Christians in Britain and France started having conversations about how slavery was morally wrong, and they started having conversations like, maybe we should start doing something about this. We got to end this. African tribes started sending up diplomats to Europe to say, you guys can't end slavery. That's the foundation of our economy.
Yeah, there was what's really ironic, and I guessed it. I forget who I was with, but when Nancy Pelosi and her friends took the knee with the scarf,
with the kente cloth,
with the kente cloth, I had no idea. I had no idea where it was from, other than it was from Africa. And I just looked at it. I go, those are a bunch of leftists who are just virtue signaling. I guarantee you, the cloth they're wearing was from an African tribe that did slavery. I promise you. And they have no idea because they don't. What the irony of how they talk about African nations without pointing out the individuality of every single of the thousands of tribes that make up Africa. It's like, yeah, you don't care about their culture. You care about the virtue.
Slavery was prevalent in many West and Central African societies long before and during and after the transatlantic slave trade. And when the Europeans got there, they weren't getting off the boat and galloping across the African plain to catch people. They came along coastal African tribes that were already engaged in the slave trade that made their money off of conquering other tribes, enslaving them, and selling them. They made a tremendous amount of money selling them to the Ottoman Empire, which, by the way, more black men died from the side effects of castration during the enslavement by the Ottoman Empire than died during the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm not trying to minimize the transatlantic slave trade. I'm just trying to put things in context.
Yeah.
That what is significant about slavery and the American founding is the fact that only one country in the world abolished it, and that was the United States, and that was because of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. And all of the founders acknowledged that, not all of the founders, but the vast bulk of the founders acknowledged that slavery was a great moral sin. Yeah. The question was what to do about it now. These were men that stepped outside of their cultural conditioning. We were talking about that earlier, and to realize that what was going on was wrong, that the slaves that they themselves had acquired through their family
should be free.
Yeah, no, and almost all of them worked to do so.
Yep. And Thomas Jefferson was one of the keys behind that, and I want to talk a little bit about his stance on it. You're listening to 1360 KHNC,
the Liberty Revolt,
Liberty Revolt Media.com. Yeah. The great irony, another great irony, because like I always try to also point out, because like when it comes to these kinds of issues, it's just, this isn't one of the issues where you can talk to the right about, because the right's pretty good on this issue. So.
Savvy says, I'm part Cherokee and my ancestors were slave owners and oppressed by the Democratic Party. All five, Kobe says all five civilized tribes were slave owners. I assume he means all five.
Yeah, the Trail of Tears.
Major.
The 5 civilized tribes were the ones marched down the Trail of Tears. And they all were slave owners. They all had slaves. Because you got to also realize that when the Trail of Tears was going on in the 1820s and 30s, the West Coast still was very much run by Native American tribes. So the 5 civilized tribes, though, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, I don't remember, but yeah, they were all slave owners, and I'm trying to think of what I was gonna say something about what the founders did. So it's actually how I view the Declaration of Independence versus the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? Mm-hmm. To me, when you're talking about when legislators make law, they talk about the intent of the law, right? You have to know the intent behind it. The American country. Mm-hmm. The Constitution is just the implementation of that intent.
The principles that they believe were worth founding a government upon.
And I actually want to do a little bit on that here for a second. Yeah. Before the break, we were talking about the American founding and the Declaration of Independence, and it was an issue. Thomas Jefferson wrote about this extensively in his journals and stuff about the issue he had with slavery. And he said, the battle for slavery will be paid for in blood, but it should not occur. It was just, you could not do it right then and there, or the entirety of what the United States was in 1789 when the Constitution was ratified and the Bill of Rights was ratified. It would have fallen apart. It would not have lasted. And you needed it to last because if you can create that American culture.
They realized they could not fight the Revolutionary War and the Civil War simultaneously.
Because slavery did not stand the test of the Declaration. And this is what people need to understand about the Declaration versus the Constitution. The Constitution is just the implementation of the Declaration of Independence, which is why when you're looking at, when you're asking the question like, hey, is our system good? this is why I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. No, the way we have it now, our Constitution has been bastardized and destroyed. The Bill of Rights has been expanded beyond any of the intent possible. And the laws on the books and stuff, the government has grown. The Declaration of Independence is the document that describes what the American values are: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And slavery.
And it's the greatest anti-slavery document
ever written.
And
that's why the American culture was so necessary, because if you could grow people to understand both the importance of the Declaration and the Constitution, one of those would not stand the test of the other, and one of those would inspire men to destroy the parts of the other. And that's what happened. The Declaration, if you read that, and you cannot help but read that and be inspired by it, you then look at the idea of slavery and you're like, no, I'm sorry. These values are the ones I'm going to live for, I'm going to fight for, and I'm going to die for. And they do not support this right here. And if it's in our Constitution, it needs to go, because my government will not, my state will not have that.
All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable
rights. The right of life.
And in one of the original drafts, Thomas Jefferson actually wrote in his list of grievances against the king, he says, "You have imposed this institution upon us where men, in all capital letters, are bought and sold as if they were property."
Yeah. And it's the point is that it could not stand. The Declaration of Independence, as I can't find really too many libertarians, anarcho-capitalists that do not love what the Declaration says. And their problem with the Constitution and the way our government is now, especially, is that it does not line up with the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. It does not line up with the idea that all men are created equal and bestowed with those inalienable rights. And it was who originally called it life, liberty, and property? That would be our boy John Locke. And that's the other part of it. They understood that property is an extension of the self. What you have earned is an extension of you, which is why it should be protected. But your pursuit of happiness is what you earn. In your pursuit of happiness, that is your property.
And that was also one of the ideas they were kicking around when in the drafts of the Declaration. They were talking about putting property in there. But again, there was still massive populations of people in the United States who were still engaging in slavery, wanted to keep their slaves, and we're not going to.
This is not property.
Yeah, and we're not going to help keep us, help defend this country's independence from Britain if that was included in it.
Yeah, no.
And if you read the Federalist Papers, they talk. They talk about a lot of this
extensively. They talk extensively, and if you read anything, because it was the Enlightenment that really started to spark this idea, right? And really, it wasn't until the Enlightenment that the idea of the individual and individual autonomy really took hold philosophically, right? Mm-hmm. That's when you started to have that. The Enlightenment basically started around the time of Descartes' mind-body problem, right? And in the pursuit of figuring out what truly composes the soul, you have to ask the question: what makes a person a person? And if you answer that question honestly, there is no way what makes a person depends on their race at all. Therefore, all humans are men, all humans are people, and slavery does not stand up one iota to that. And Thomas Jefferson knew, and a bunch of other founding fathers knew, that a war would be fought over it, and it was going to be a bloody one. Right. And what they needed is to create the culture that wanted to fight that war, and that's what the Declaration did. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
absolutely. And the equivalent of that war today would be like 6 million deaths.
Yeah, which is, the Second Amendment, because I want to bring that into this as well, is incredibly important because it allows you to defend yourself from the same state that would tell people they are property. It allows
the foundation of gun restriction laws in this country was to restrict gun ownership from slaves.
Yes. Black people just continue to get screwed over by it, but mind you, because it was then Ronald Reagan really wanted to help that push. He sided with the Democrats on that one back in the day. But the foundation, the idea, if you are able to protect yourself and you actually have the monopoly of violence over yourself, no one can turn you into a slave without you agreeing to it. And that comes with the idea also of, if you have to die to stop that, you get to make that choice. Is it worth my life or not? And everybody deserves that choice. And I think most people would say, I would rather die on my knees than live in chains. Like, give me freedom or give me death. That was a mentality that I think still lives among some of us today, but should be taught. It's like, no, I would rather die than give up these freedoms. It's why people, they're so surprised when it's like, why won't you just, get the vaccine? Because I would rather die than do it because I was coerced into it. If I can't be convinced to do it consensually, I'm not doing it at all. Like, I don't know how.
CONSENT. See what can do for you and me.
Get some before you sleep with me. Consent is, oh man.
We are really bad.
No, I mean, what's bad about that? He's saying wow. Kavika's saying wow to us right now.
Flashing numbers.
No, he's saying wow. No, but it comes down to the idea that I am not a fan of the state. You're not a fan of the state as the monopoly of violence and currency and education. And there's a reason for that, because the state is incentivized, to get back to incentives, the state is always incentivized to keep itself alive, as all organisms are. The state is no different. An organization run by organisms is in itself an organism. It's a body. It's become so. And the body's going to try to fight off any kind of disease. And people like you and me represent a disease to it. We represent a cancer to it. And if we're allowed to grow, we could potentially destroy it. And that's why people like us are always going to be, held in contempt by it. And so
this is the rebellion.
This is the Liberty Revolt
on 1360
KHNC.
So we have to do this for Brent. What is with red Colorado license plates?
Oh, so they're fleet vehicles and they represent a different registration. They're, you see them for
like work trucks?
Yeah, work trucks and rental cars, government
fleet vehicles.
Yeah, fleet. Yeah. So they fall under a different tax status and have a different registration requirements and stuff like that. And it's like in California, you have different license plates. I like California because you can always spot the undercover police cars because they're required to have California government license plates. They're plain white, say CA government, and they're very easy to spot. So you can tell when a vehicle's an undercover because it literally says it on there.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Well, we have just a little short break coming up. So guys, we want to wrap it up in this final segment. Final points on slavery and the American founding. I wish we had time to get into some of the quotes of the founders because
we will.
They really had some choice quotes.
What are we getting? We're getting a morning show. We will have the time.
We will have the time.
We will have nothing but time for it. So, by the way, if you guys have any suggestions for guests, I want to get a hold of Michael Schellenberger. He lives here in Greeley, or he lives in Greeley.
We're gonna bring Spike Cohen back.
Yes, absolutely.
We're working on Dave Smith.
We'll get Spike Cohen first.
We'll probably get Spike Cohen first.
Yeah, and then we also want Republicans. We want Democrats. We want all sides of the aisle because we want to be able to have debates and stuff too. Oh, it's still in.
Yeah, but we'll be open with our Greg Lopez wants us to do an interview, which would mean we'd have to interview. Danielle,
I know Heidi Ganol personally. I know Heidi Ganol personally.
It's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see how the libertarians react to us interviewing Republican candidates. I mean.
We're libertarians, but our listeners aren't necessarily. We just want more libertarians, and we're going to ask them questions that you want libertarians
to ask. Kobe says, debate me 2 versus 1. I'm a real master debater.
I'm the master of all debaters. I master debate.
I'll master debate you 2 versus 1 anytime, Kobe. Bucky Dillon. If you guys are listening on the live stream and you're not listening on the radio broadcast, not only are you missing out on so many of our wonderful advertisers and sponsors, you're missing out on the best radio on 1360 KHNC. Frankly, we have the best music, and it's not even close. Everyone knows it. I know it. They know it. And most importantly, you know it. Okay? Thank you.
I just want to say, above all,
that we have the best music on the
dang
radio, man.
Music. We are undefeated.
So
Bucky is undefeated in the bump music category on all radio. You guys are really missing out. And you're missing out on... We do have to say, when we're doing the 7 to 9 a.m., we prefer you to listen on 1360 KHNC if possible, so you can also hear our wonderful advertisers. Because there's a lot of really great advertisers on 1360 KHNC, and they do a lot of really good work. We have done... if you are looking into potentially becoming an advertiser, we do community events. Bucky organizes wonderful events for us. We do everything we can to get you in touch with people who are going to want to buy your products and share your values, so you know you can become uncancelable, which is the most important thing in today's economy. And at the end of the day, you know, it's a bunch of really good people, and I think we're contractually obligated. So,
yeah.
No, but like I said, ladies and gentlemen, you know, slavery did not stand up to the test of the moral foundations of America, nor the economic foundations of America. Capitalism will make things more efficient, and it is much easier to replace a piece of metal than a human being. Significantly easier.
I was shaking my head no to Brent in the comments, not to what you were saying.
No,
by the way.
But yeah, I know you wanted to touch on especially the economy, and you know what? We're going to have so much time to talk about this stuff because we're getting a morning show. And but yeah, so when they bring up slavery, you have people who listen to the 1619 Project and legitimately believe that's when slavery started, when the first slaves were brought to the American coast, by the way, bought by Anthony Johnson, a black man. And so it's going to be really important that we continue to fight these ideas, and we arm ourselves with the facts. And we arm ourselves with the reality so we can actually talk like, hey, the word you're using itself refers to white people that were enslaved in Eastern Europe. Like, to not understand that the concept itself, yes, it was applied in American history. And you know what? It did not stand up to the American culture. Stop trying to tear it down.
Right. We have 27 to 40 million slaves in the world today, primarily in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
Yeah. Sex slavery, especially.
Nowhere in any Western country.
Nope. And you can think a lot of people in Africa can.
Although we are propping up some of it in Latin America with this horrific war on drugs.
Hillary Clinton literally gave it the green light when she destroyed Libya, and now and allowed for the resurgence of the North African slave trade. So there's that. The Democrats really do love their slavery. But hey, you know, we're here to attack everybody. Eventually, we'll get around to the conservatives as well. Although nowadays I have a lot less complaints with them than I do the radical left.
Right. Yeah. We're moving down the list of priorities, guys. There's a lot of libertarians that feel like we don't Republican bash enough, and we do a little bit of Republican bashing.
It's just hard now because like that's how crazy the left is right now, is that it's just hard to ignore what they're doing. The left
is very authoritarian, and we'll make our way to Evan, the authoritarian. Eventually, we certainly will. Yep. You guys are listening to the Liberty Revolt on 1360 KHNC. It's so nice to be with you. Remember, being a patriot means more than loving the geography. It means more than loving your founding ideals. It means loving all Americans, even the ones that are a little bit misguided. So let's go out there, let's love our neighbors, and let's teach them that liberty is the way.
So I know we're going to have to make a deal with Joe to keep using the Liberty Revolt name because he doesn't want us advertising.
Okay, so we won't lead off every episode by saying www.libertyrevoltmedia.com, facebook.com/libertyrevoltmedia, youtube.com/libertyrevolt, instagram.com/libertyrevoltmedia.
So we do it during all the live streams.
We will just call the show the Liberty Revolt, and we'll say that stuff during the live streams.
And no, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. We got to call it the Liberty Revolt. What else are we going to call it? Liberty in the mornings? That's ridiculous. We're the Liberty Revolt.
I honestly think if he, for some reason, doesn't, I think calling it the Compliance Report would be ironically.
If we're generating $10,000 a month in revenue for him, give me a break. Okay?
Yeah, no, seriously. What we should do is if we really crack it, be like, all right, and 1,000 of that is going to the Liberty Revolt, from the Liberty Revolt to sponsor the show.
Yeah, we should write a check from Liberty Revolt.
Yeah, so we are the main sponsor. Today's episode of the Liberty Revolt is sponsored by the Liberty Revolt.
Go to www.libertyrevoltmedia.com. I'll put it in the ad rotator.
That's the kind of spin, not spin the face, but like
capitalism that I love.
Well, he would. I think he would find it pretty funny too, because it's generating revenue for him.
Yeah,
but
absolutely, guys, tuning in the live stream. Thank you.
I wonder if Brandon's here yet. I don't know. I'm gonna go check.
Unfortunately,
I texted quickly.
Today's episode of the Liberty Revolt is over,
Brandon, you are here too.
And it's time to move on for both of us. It's not you. It's us. I know we had something special. But remember, you can always relive these moments by stalking us online at facebook.com/Liberty Revolt Media. This is goodbye.